you were informed by your brother and your father, both of whom had serious respiratory problems created by allergies.
Yes.
And you were 14.
Yes. So I actually got interested in air quality when I was 11 years old, and that was after seeing a problem in my family, and that was that my brother and my dad suffered from severe chronic allergy symptoms that persisted well past the pollen season. And I actually have a very long history of respiratory disorders in my family. So it was something that, as an 11-year-old, I was like, why is this happening to my family? And I wanted to ask questions that I could answer through science research.
The problem is, though, that when you went in to look at allergies and when you went in, presumably on Google and elsewhere, you came up with things you didn't understand.
Yes.
So, I mean, why didn't you stop there? I mean, how did you understand conceptually things which nobody of 11 would understand?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think most kids who take on science research at a young age will agree that it's really difficult to step in looking at peer-reviewed articles, and the literature is already available in the field. And I think that one way that we overcome that is by looking for mentors and looking for people who are already in the field willing to guide us. And so as an 11-year-old, I'd basically cold call different universities in the area, companies, and I'd ask for materials that I could understand as an 11-year-old, or I'd go through and
You admitted you were 11.
Yes.
Yeah.
And everyone was definitely taken aback at someone in middle school trying to ask these questions, but I think it's because of that they were really willing to open their arms and willing to open their resources to someone who was a lot younger, who was interested in the science.
See, Jack, I can cope with Naomi because essentially her research was linear. But your problem was you were looking at pancreatic cancer, and you were motivated, I think, by the death of a close family friend. You were looking at pancreatic cancer, which is somewhere in here, or is it here, or is it around here? I don't even know where the hell the thing is. But you were looking at pancreatic cancer, and you wanted a quick way to diagnose it. So how did you start?
Well, I actually became interested when a close family friend that was 13 when they passed from the disease. And then what I found is that 85% of all cancers are diagnosed late when someone has less than a 2% chance of survival. But also there's no current diagnostic test. Like the current one costs $800 and misses 30% of all cancers. And it hasn't been updated in 6 decades. I mean, that's older than my dad. So,
That's very old indeed.
Essentially what happened is I just used Google and Wikipedia to do all of my research. And essentially I didn't, at first I had no clue what these scientific papers were doing. And there's this popular saying in cancer research is that essentially you feel like you're just hitting your head against a brick wall, but eventually a few of those bricks began to fall. And that's essentially what I did. I just hit my head against these papers until they finally kind of made sense.
So you could identify really with Sagata's claim that you could throw these kids in this Indian village at a screen, bombard them with information they couldn't understand, but they would find a way through it. And that's what happened to you.
Yeah, that's essentially what happened. I'd kind of just go through my highlighter and just highlight it while watching the Glee season finale, of course. And then essentially I would finally understand it and just kind of piece together all these different puzzle pieces and try and come up with different unique ways to solve the problem.
So far, so good. You're both finding out material about the condition that you're trying to research, but you're not finding any solution that is going to change things. So how did you move from finding out to finding a solution?
That's a really good question. So it definitely wasn't something that happened immediately. It wasn't like I started researching an effort to find a solution. I just started researching for me to understand kind of where the problem was coming from. So I've been working on this for 7 years, and for the first 4 or 5 years, it was really about me understanding the relationships in our environment. How do these indoor air pollutants in environments where we spend over 90% of our lives impact our lung health? And then it was really in the past 2 years that I've been working on creating a solution, which is basically I'm working on creating a biofilter to remove these pollutants from indoor air streams. And the solution really came after doing all of the preliminary research and after being in the field for so long and just being exposed to some of these ideas. It was something that gradually I was able to think, how can we take a step back and filter out these pollutants so even before these harmful chemicals and harmful particles come into contact with our lungs, they're being removed from our environments.
Well, hang on a minute, because you've almost skipped a step. I'm thinking of that diamond revolving and then changing its direction. the change of direction surely had to be away from the idea that medication was what your father and your brother needed, and towards environment. And that in itself, for somebody of 11, 12, 13, 14, is conceptually quite a difficult jump. Or perhaps it isn't. I don't know. Maybe because you're not cluttered with all the things we're cluttered with, it wasn't. I don't know. No, How did you change from thinking, as the doctors were thinking, take some more drugs, to thinking, hang on a minute, where do they live?
No, that's a really good point. I definitely think that it wasn't an immediate change. It wasn't something that was very obvious, and a lot of people don't see that. I guess how it came is I've seen in my family that people have been, taking drugs or taking inhalers, taking steroids to treat some of the disorders that they've faced. And it's definitely a short-term solution. It's something that, they can survive on for a few years. But what I was thinking about, and I guess that might come from a more younger generation, kind of like looking at these problems from a younger perspective, is that how can we remove these dangers from the root of the problem? And in my mind, that was in the environment that we were living in.
You've understood peer-reviewed papers, you've made contact with various sources and the rest of it, but you haven't got to a discovery as to how to detect pancreatic cancer.
Well, actually, my kind of epiphany moment happened in my high school biology class. I know it's like, high school biology class, what were you doing there? Like throwing spitballs at someone probably, but that's what I do in my biology class at least. But yeah, so essentially I just snuck in this article on single-walled carbon nanotubes. And you can imagine—
Hang on a minute, slow down. Say again.
Single-walled carbon nanotubes. And so that sounds like—
There are several words there which themselves would have required research. Nanotubes.
Okay,
right, okay, don't tell me, but you discovered this anyway.
Yeah, I pretty much just read it online. I was just like, these look really interesting, because they had this long fancy name and acronyms. I'm just like, ooh. And so essentially there are these long thin pipes of carbon that are an atom thick and 1/50,000th the diameter of your hair. And they have these extremely amazing properties. They're kind of like the superheroes of material science. And so essentially I had just been reading about these properties in my biology class. And then we were reading about these things called antibodies, essentially molecules that only react with one specific protein. In this case, it would be a cancer biomarker. And then I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden it hit me. What if I took these antibodies and kind of like mashed them up with like these nanotubes? And so essentially weave these antibodies into this network of nanotubes, and then you have a network that only reacts with one specific protein, but also will change its electrical properties based on that protein present.
At this point, you have to extract yourself presumably from the computer and the internet and start thinking about a practical experiment to see whether you can detect pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, and so that was actually, so once I came up with that, I actually realized my mom wasn't going to let me do cancer research on my kitchen
Were you looking for
countertop.
grannies with pancreatic cancer?
No, I was not looking for grannies with pancreatic cancer. But essentially, I was looking for people that would let me into the lab, because my mom, she'd put up with a lot, like E. coli, where I make sandwiches and stuff. But essentially what happened is I contacted 200 professors at Johns Hopkins University and the National Institutes of Health. And
Disclosing your age?
Yes, I was just like, hi, I'm 14, and so let me into your lab. And of course, I sent them like a procedure, a materials list, and that. And I got 199 rejections. And I realized one thing, like—
But you got one.
Yes, I finally got one. It was a maybe, though. And I realized that professors, like, their face, like, their profile picture doesn't really match up with how nice they are at all. But, yeah, so—
That, I think, is also clear in the Congolese jungle. Yeah, carry on.
But essentially what happened is I finally got into this lab space, and I kind of, once again, just like beat at this problem for about 7 months trying to make the sensor.
The maybe let you into the lab.
Yeah, the maybe after like this like hour-long interrogation where he like calls in PhDs and they're all like firing these questions, and they're like, it was pretty intense in there.
I bet they were excited though.
Oh, it didn't show on their faces. They were like,
You're at a very dangerous point here, which I'll come back to in a moment, and I'll pick you up there. But I just want to now get to this point at which you've understood something we've all claimed as workers, that buildings do suffer from sick building syndrome. And you've got a solution.
Yes.
But it's— carry on.
Okay, so basically my solution is that I've created this filter which is based on plant species. And as these volatile organic compounds, which are basically chemical pollutants, anything that emits or scent or a smell in our home, as they come into contact with these plant species, the plants will metabolically break them down into harmless byproducts like carbon dioxide and water vapor. So these microorganisms are using these pollutants as an energy source, and at the same time, we're benefiting because we get clean air. So I've run all of this at a simulation level in the basement of my home, and the results are very
without
promising.
becoming extremely ill.
Yes, exactly. So it's all like a controlled environment. So just like Jack, I didn't have very much access to a lab in my area, so I just did everything using materials based on like a high school budget. And so it was a really cool experience because I was able to build everything on my own, and the solution is a very cost-effective and sustainable one that ideally could be implemented anywhere in the world.
Have you patented it?
Right now I'm working on that. So it's in a very provisional like research stage right now, and so I'm working on getting a provisional patent for it.
And that's the $64,000 question with you, because the fact is you're sitting there with a whole lot of PhD students and a maybe professor who might or might not help. They're going to steal your idea.
Oh, well, luckily that didn't happen. So I'm rather glad that didn't happen. But essentially, I ended up with one small paper sensor that costs 3 cents and it takes 5 minutes to run. So it's over 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than current ones. And you can broadly extend it to pretty much any disease, ranging from Alzheimer's to heart disease, other forms of cancer, and even HIV/AIDS. And I do have the international patent on it.
We're completely out of time because you're so intriguing, but I'm going to ask you 2 very quick questions. One, what did your parents, what did they do right or wrong to create a situation in which you occurred?
Okay, so I'll start. So neither of my parents were really in the science field. This is my mom. She's in the front here.
Hello, Mommy. Yes.
But what they did right, and now as I'm 18 years old heading off to college, I can finally admit that it was at a very young age, they were so encouraging of any curiosity that I had. So I'd go to science museums and let me just run around as a 2-year-old, play with anything that I wanted in the science museum. And it's that kind of encouragement and not necessarily pushing me in a direction, but just letting me kind of go and take my own research path, answer the questions that I was interested in. I think that's the best way to do it, just because now I'm on a track where it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I want to continue in this field for the rest of my life.
And you?
Well, essentially it was like trial and error with me. It wasn't as much trial and error as my older brother. He kind of got like the brunt of that. But essentially they kind of like cycled me through like
you kept looking for his pancreas.
Yeah. Well, actually, like I have this plastic pancreas in a jar of water now. So essentially they cycled me through like every single sport, every single musical instrument, and I finally settled on science. Like I sat in left baseball field making daisy chains, and then they had to have ear-splitting trombone music in their house, and finally they're like, oh my goodness, just go do some science. That's what you like. And so that's essentially how they got me into that. And really, their kind of philosophy is like a hands-off one. They're just like, you just do whatever you want.
He'll
So, like,
grow out of it.
Me and my brother just like make these dangerous things in our basement. There's like, just don't blow up the house. That's the basic ground rule.
Last question in a word. What's your ambition?
My ambition is to hopefully be able to have everyone be able to have that one extra bit of time with their uncle or parent, and then really be able to inspire people, because I'm a 15-year-old. Or I was a 15-year-old, and I found a new way to detect pancreatic cancer using just Google and Wikipedia. So really, just imagine what you could do.
And you?
That's a really good question. It's a heavy question. My ambition would be definitely to continue research and just to improve the human condition using environmental sources. I think that if we can target the root of these problems, that's the best solution. And part of my ambition is also encouraging kids to enter the science research field at a younger age, especially people who might not have the same opportunities that I have.
And while you sit there, I'm just going to ask Mummy, and I'm going to take my microphone over there. I'm just going to ask you, was there ever a moment, and you can speak into my microphone, was there ever a moment when you were scared by your child's development?
I was never scared. I have been proud very often, and I'm just amazed at all the opportunities that she has, and she's doing a lot of things to provide that similar opportunities to other girls and underprivileged children by doing camps.
Well, it reflects fantastically on you.
Thank
you
you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much.